thank you so much, Will, for joining. You have been active on the Pause AI Discord server, and I recently reacted to a video by Lyron Shapira, and he's also active in that server. He gave that a shout out, and so I decided I should go check it out to see, because I wanted to see what arguments people had in favor of pausing AI and in favor of the X risk perspective. And you were one of the people who read some of my thoughts and commented that you would like to have a discussion, and you could come on my channel and discuss. And I really appreciate that. So sure. Why don't you, for a second, just kind of give us a little bit about your background, especially as it relates to the AI X risk debate?
Sure. So previous job was as a video game programmer, and I've done like lots of other things prior to that, including a paralegal at an intellectual property law office, semiconductor engineer, and a bunch of other things. Kind of too many to list, actually. And the last year or so, I'd kind of heard about AI related stuff and X risk things through Less Wrong and like Rob Miles videos a good over 10 years ago. Filed it away as something like, this is a later issue, very interesting, but probably not that big of a deal, or at least not for a long time. And played around with like Unity's machine learning agents to get a kind of a sense for how reinforcement learning works. Built some neural network visualizers, which I have I have two YouTube channels. One is Zen Marmot Digital, where I have like video game related stuff, and then also just Will Petillo for AI related things mostly. I wanted to keep those separate.
Yeah.
And so, then after ChatGPT came out, I realized the timelines seem a lot shorter than I thought they were. A lot of other people kind of came to that same conclusion. And initially I started trying to find my way into some form of technical alignment, leveraging game design. So I spent a little while trying to build a Grid Worlds level editor to be able to test different algorithms and see how they performed on various safety related benchmarks. I've also at one point built a probability calculator to be able to assess different viewpoints, and you could just connect a bunch of nodes together, use probabilistic logic, and determine initially it was about figuring out what is your pnum, but you could use it for any number of other things, anything involving probability. So I may send you a link for that.
That'd be really cool.
Kind of thing. I think it would be I haven't really used it for much this yet, but I think it would be a really good way to get exactly where people disagree, where your intuitions actually differ.
Yeah.
The way to use it isn't super intuitive. But anyway, I think one thing that was a bit of a turning point for me, was I went to a virtual AI safety unconference, or VISU, and saw a lot of different proposals for alignment ideas that people had there. And a lot of them were pretty good, but they were all volunteers. And I figure for any of this to matter, these kind of ideas need to be happening at OpenAI or Anthropic or those sort of things. Whereas what I was actually seeing is the super alignment approaches at OpenAI and others seem to basically just be well, we'll let the AI figure it out. And that did not seem like a real plan, or at least in comparison to what I was seeing volunteers come up with. And that pointed me in the direction of, this is really a coordination problem more than a technical one, or at least initially. So that started getting increasingly involved in Pause AI at that point. Initially on the server, it was just a bunch of people working on stuff and trying to find collaborations or giving each other support, kind of chaotic. And that was a little frustrating to me because I had things that I wanted to work on, and I was having a hard time getting anyone else to work with me on it. So I ended up finding my role in the server as the onboarding team lead. So welcoming new people as they come in, helping connect them with projects that are of interest, and basically just easing out the kind of friction that I was running into as a member. So that's what a lot of my focus is on right now. Split between that, and I'm also working on a AI safety camp project on simulator theory, which is a group that I'm leading, and we're eventually it'll come out into a blog post kind of thing. I'm probably not going to talk about that much this time, since that's a whole digression right there, unless it happens to come up. It's also like one of the few slivers of positivity is actually comes out of this line of thinking. So I'm probably going to be arguing on the more pessimistic side for this particular debate. But there's a lot of nuance around this.
Yeah. Just to dive into that really quick, just so that we can understand a little bit more. When you say simulation theory, is that similar to the simulation hypothesis, like Nick Bostrom's thing, where we are in a simulation, or is that a different? Completely different line.
Completely different
reasoning. Okay.
Completely different thing.
Okay.
As related as Java to JavaScript.
Okay, got it. Sounds good.
So the basic idea is a way of looking at large language models and seeing, like, does the thinking of these as agents make sense, as opposed to agent is one way of looking at an AI as like a thing that wants things.
Yeah.
You could also look at it as a tool. It like does things that it's told. And then the simulator is kind of not either of those. It's like a disinterested laws of physics, which then summons up characters or oracles or tools or lots of other things. But then it has the possibility of, like, some of the things that it creates are simulacra, which are characters, which then generate the text, and those have agency, but it's not the same as the model itself.
That's very interesting.
It's a whole like kind of a deep dive of a topic. My channel on under my name, Will Petillo, I have an interview with Robert Kralish, who's one of the organizers of AISC, and we kind of go into a lot of it, what it means, what the alternatives are, what the implications are, that sort of thing.
Yeah, I think that's a really a very needed area of exploration. I think a lot of people are uninterested in how you conceptualize AI. They just want to make a better product. But when I hear people framing things in agentic terms, I typically think that the issue with that is there's a lot of implications when you start referring to something as being goal-oriented, and there is a risk. I'm not saying that their arguments are necessarily wrong. We can debate that. This isn't a debate point, but I do think that there is a risk that when people hear the way that we currently describe AIs in terms of having goals and as agents, there's a lot of implications that just naturally pop into somebody's head. And if you're naive, you might get the wrong idea about what it actually means when it's being described that way. And I think that partly just due to a lack of precision. And like when I see people debate this, like I reviewed the debate between Wolfram and Yudkowsky. And Wolfram was it was kind of almost an unproductive debate, because Wolfram was just nitpicking at everything Yudkowsky was saying. He was like, do they really have goals? Do they really, like, what does this mean? And it was like hours of that. And to some extent, it got juicy at parts, but it was kind of boring. But the issue, and I criticized Yudkowsky for this at the time, and it's just a minor thing, not a big deal, but it's like, Yudkowsky introduced these terms like goals and intelligence, and use all these terms that have a ton of implications. And then he didn't I'm not saying he doesn't have this toolkit and this framework, but he didn't communicate the framework along for how we should really think about this. So when it's kind of, you can't blame someone like Wolfram or anyone else for like hearing some of these words, then kind of jumping to a lot of conclusions, getting lost in the weeds. If we can really develop a really good language for talking about AI and like better mental models for how to think about these things, probably a lot of these ideas would have a lot of overlap, and you could probably map like one concept within one theory to another. But if we can come up with a better toolkit and language for talking about it, I think we're going to have way more productive conversations about this.
Yeah, so speaking to that Wolfram versus Yudkowsky debate, I've seen the same video. I think my assessment of it overall is they had slightly different like purposes with it. So Yudkowsky was wanting to like create something for the audience and kind of have a back and forth of ideas so that like people could see what does Wolfram think versus what do I think. Whereas I got the pretty strong sense that Stephen Wolfram was there to satisfy his own curiosity. Never mind, and the audience can listen in if they want to. Who cares? Like he was curious about things, and he was asking the right questions for himself. It's just the thing that Stephen Wolfram is curious about and wants to think about, and what helps his own process is different from what everyone else watching in would want to hear about. I'd say it's kind of a little bit of a cross purposes rather than any kind of failure. And also I recommend the debate just kind of skip around as needed. The other thing I want to say towards what you were talking about, like confusions regarding these sort of terms, those expectations that comes with the ideas of goals and agents are actually kind of the point in using those terms. It is very intentional to use those terms and create those expectations. And that's something that is kind of just necessary for compressing information and being intelligible. And you kind of have to pick it one way or the other. So if you're not talking about agents and you're instead talking about AI as a tool, that comes with its own set of assumptions and implications. Related to that, and this kind of goes back to this, simulator theory and kind of connects to this debate in some ways, is I think that the agent model worked pretty unambiguously well for reinforcement learning. Which was dominant in AI for quite a while. This is what my machine learning agents, playing around worked with, and when you are training things that are like soccer players that kick a ball around and are trying to score goals, calling that anything other than goal directed seems just weird. But the question, though, is does self-supervised learning in large language models is a different architecture. So does that change things? And I think that's kind of an open question, which I'm interested in exploring. Yeah. There's also the question of, even if it is true, will agency just come back?
And I agree. I agree that the gold model, it works pretty well. I like to use it. I like to think about things and talk about things in that way. But it's a loaded term. And I get that rhetorically that can be useful, and it can also lead people astray when if they start kind of taking some of the implications that don't necessarily hold. Just this is such a stupid one. I'm just coming up with this on the spot, but you can say oh yeah, he has the goal, but what if he gets hungry or something? You could you can kind of mix there's a lot of things in the human psyche that go on, and there's implications for, the way that things work, where if you're naive in the conversation, maybe you're someone who's extremely smart like Stephen Wolfram and is new to the conversation, you might catch on to something and push down a path that's going to ultimately be not productive because of the implications, because there's so many things going on. When you talk about a human having goals, it's hard for people to disentangle those concepts, and it sometimes can lead to confusion. But I agree, it functionally, for people who know what they're talking about, it seems like a pretty good way of reasoning.
Actually, I think one place where I can see that being relevant, and a thing where I would agree is kind of a confusion, is if you start talking about goals and that comes with an implicit assumption of consciousness.
Yeah, right.
And you have to spell that out and disentangle it. I think ultimately I would actually kind of defend the use of some of these terms, but I agree that it is important to be mindful with them and bring to the surface what is being assumed. And if the thing that you're assuming is the thing that the other person's arguing about, that's going to get stuck until you make that clear.
Yeah. And I think we can talk a lot more about these things in a sec, but what I'd like to do before we jump into the overall debate / discussion, and this is just a friendly discussion, but we do disagree, so it's a debate in a sense. But I'd like to just kind of maybe go through a list of topics and just get your quick takes on them. These are not going to be directly related, but what this will do is this will give me a chance to understand how you think about the world and how you model different things. And then I'll hopefully be able to relate some of my explanations and language to the things that you already believe, so we can just have a more direct conversation. And I'll also share my thoughts on this. And so if we have some sort of fundamental disagreement, we might be able to get to the crux of that. And it may not actually, we might agree on a lot of the AI technical details. I find myself thinking that AI doom proponents have a lot of good points, and there's just certain areas in which we disagree. And I have what I think is a relatively unique worldview, and typically it's when I apply that worldview to these things where I end up diverging. So I'd like to both share how I think about stuff and also just get kind of your quick perspective on things. Are you okay with that?
Sounds great. If we were switched roles, that's exactly the kind of line of questions I'd be asking you. So
okay,
go ahead.
Awesome. So what do you think about evolution? Is it valid? And you don't have to answer if you're religious. That's a very personal question, but I'm just curious, how you approach this type of thing: evolution, Darwinism, religion. What are your quick thoughts on that?
Theory of evolution sounds true.
Okay. Sounds good. Okay. And I won't prod into your personal beliefs. Unless you feel,
I'm happy to. I feel very comfortable not answering a question that I don't want to answer.
Sure.
So ask whatever you like.
Okay. So are you religious?
No.
Okay. So okay. And do you have have you studied? Do you have a background in biology? Have you studied evolution in depth and thought about Darwinianism, like universal Darwinism, and how evolutionary forces shape things, or is this something you just haven't really explored very much intellectually?
So one thing, I'll step back a little bit since you were asking about religion. I went to Catholic school for 7 years.
Yeah.
And so I have a little bit of familiarity with religion. And also in undergrad, I was studying medieval history, medieval Europe. And so there was a lot of history was entangled with religion very closely, especially if you're looking into intellectual history that the professors I was learning from very much were. So I have some familiarity with that. And then also that's that whole the tensions, I'm not going to say divide, but just sort of tensions between that and evolution. The kind of schools that I went to tried to find ways for these to be compatible. But I'm also very much aware that there are other branches that don't. So that's a little bit of background there. In terms of evolution, I'd say I'd probably have I'm not a biologist. I don't have specialized background, but I'd say knowledgeable for a layperson.
Okay. Yeah, that makes sense. Same here. I'm a hobbyist, but I would not claim to at all be a biologist, but it's just an interesting concept that I do reference a good amount. But it seems like you're going to have a roughly similar understanding of that than I do, given what you're saying. And for me, I do strongly believe that evolution is a very powerful predictive model. I think Darwin was mostly right. There are some people like Brett Weinstein who have raised interesting additions and modifications to Darwin's theories, but basically he is absolutely he's spot on there. In terms of religion, I personally am not religious, but I would like to be. I'm honestly just I am looking for that. I want to figure that out, but I don't actually, I'm not super convinced by anything right now. So I'm continuously learning in that department. I do see the value of having religion in one's life. And we could talk a bit more about that if that's interesting, but anyway.
I'll say one thing for fun. Sure. When I was at a point in my life where I felt it was very important to decide what religion I wanted to be a part of or what kind of my spiritual path would be. Right. Lately, it's just not a thing I think about a whole lot.
Yeah.
But when this was I have to figure this out. The thing I settled on was this online group called Apathetic Agnosticism, which was basically the idea that there's nothing riding on making a decision here. And so if there is a God, it clearly doesn't care about whether we believe in them or not. And, if there isn't, then that's also fine. And very much rejected the idea that if you're not actively religious, then, well, you're functionally an atheist. No. You don't have to decide here. So I think since then I've kind of shifted a little bit more towards atheism, if I really think about it, but it's not something I think about a whole lot so much anymore, because it's just kind of okay, the thoughts I've had on this kind of feel repetitive at this point.
Yeah, I feel you. It's an interesting topic. And I do mention it because I do think it's going to tie in a little bit to a few things. One thing is kind of my worldview. The way I like to think about things is that there are limits to our understanding, and I can see religion can come and play a valuable role in explaining things that we're just not going to fundamentally be able to grasp. So that's one point of that I think religion has merit. And the other one, I don't want to kind of preemptively get into the debate here, but there are some parallels. People have often made the accusation that people who believe in AI risk are it's like a religious cult. People have made that. I don't want to use such derogatory language, but I have drawn parallels to some of the arguments and some of the psychological, the evolutionary psychology that pushes people towards religion. I think that's also at play in some of these discussions. I don't think we should dive into that right now, but I will certainly return on this point.
I want to return to that because that is something I want to push back on hard in a lot of different directions, but awesome. I'm fine to wait.
Perfect. Okay. Awesome. I just thought I should say that because people might be wondering, why am I even bringing this up? So, okay. Another thing I want to know is what is your political orientation? And what I want to say before we answer these things, I will answer it myself. Before we answer these things, people, listen here. We're talking about the extinction of humanity. Okay. If you disagree with us politically, this does not invalidate the importance of this conversation. You can disagree with a Trump supporter, Biden supporter, whatever, it doesn't matter. Let's all save humanity. If that is what we need to do, put that aside. We'll figure that out after we save humanity. So this should not bias anybody. But I think how you think about economics and politics is relevant to this subject, in my opinion. Really quick, how would you characterize your beliefs in that regard?
I would say I'm pretty much a progressive liberal and very much environmentalist. Actually, I'd say a more in character attire would be like tie-dye for me.
Oh, nice. Okay, cool. Yeah. And is there any, like, are you into economics? And if so, is there any particular economist that resonates with you, or any school of thought in economics that resonates with you?
Not really. I remember taking an intro to economics class in college that stuck with me a lot. And actually the Professor Yoram Bauman had a couple of like cartoon introductions to economics, which I highly recommend. They're like really sticky ways of getting at the core ideas. Mm-hmm. I don't so much like the whole. I'm very disinterested. I've dived into like a little bit some of the debates between different schools of economics, mm-hmm. like the Austrians or the mm-hmm. Keynesians and all that kind of stuff, and I find those fairly uninteresting. They're just like, there's a lot of different concepts that apply at different times in different situations, like any other complex system. Yeah. That's the kind of a thing where like I try to just be accurate on that and like what sorts of fits sort of the mainstream of economist thought, and then decide on the political implications afterwards.
Yeah, totally. Yeah, that makes sense. Yeah, I used to be really into economics. I was like a hardcore libertarian, and I do find it actually quite interesting how a lot of the people arguing against AI doom are economists. So like Robin Hanson and like Tyler Cowen has dabbled in this. And these people are also relatively libertarian leaning economists. So I used to be a hardcore libertarian. My family is like pretty progressive, so you'd probably be pretty aligned with some of my family members, like where I come from. But maybe in a streak of rebellion, I became super libertarian. And since then I have backed off of that position. And so I used to be like a Austro-libertarian. I did like Austrian economics and like Rothbardian, like anarcho-capitalism. Like I got into that for years. I don't believe in that anymore. And I think there were a lot of mistakes that were made there, that can inform. I think I see a lot of, AI doom people make the same mistakes that I think Austrian economists make. So I may or may not go down that route if this is not going to be like necessarily like a mutual point of understanding, but perhaps you'll be sympathetic to those types of arguments given that you don't seem to be a libertarian. Okay. So let me think, was there anything else? And just like, yeah, I think, okay, I'll just give like one more general question that's more relevant to AI directly. Like, do you perceive there to be any physical constraints that are going to like how do you think about the physical world, like deriving like from our understanding of physics? Like what kind of physical constraints do you think, not, this doesn't have to be an exhaustive list, but what comes to mind when you're thinking about AI's scaling? Because AI is going to scale. It's going to have constraints that are imposed by the physical world. What comes to mind to you when I ask, like, what will it be able to do? Like I've heard Yudkowsky say, it's not going to be able to reverse the SHA-256 hash function because that would just take way too much energy and there's too many possibilities. So it probably won't be able to do that. But what comes to mind when you think about the physical limits that AI is going to face?
Okay, so what's the ceiling of capability on an artificial superintelligence, essentially?
Yeah, and what type of things will like throttle its throttle its growth and improvement, and ultimately what forces in the universe will be acting against it? And it's okay, we can like actually dive into the argument if you don't have anything here. I'm just kind of.
I can speak to that.
Okay, sure.
So basically, it's kind of the obvious things of like, it's not going to just break the laws of physics, or if it appears to, that's because it's using some subtle like combination of existing laws of physics that, just isn't obvious to us currently. So yeah, just like, it's not going to do things that are impossible. It's not going to create perpetual motion, or probably not backwards time travel, or, any of those things that are like provably impossible. Mm-hmm. Beyond that, though, it's kind of And I would kind of ask the question of like, if human technology keeps advancing for 1,000 years, like what's it going to look like then?
Yeah.
And like, I don't know. Like, are some fields have probably capped out and maybe don't look a whole lot different, 50, 100, 1,000 years from now than they do now. Some we've barely scratched the surface. And then there's some dimensions of inquiry that are just like, wouldn't have occurred to us. And then how those interact with each other is, kind of a very big open question. I think the thing that's kind of seems, I find that to be like a little bit of a uninteresting or dead end, like in the limit, because in terms of like the question of AI doom, what matters to me is there headroom above where humans are? Like if the ceiling is pretty close to where human society is, that's very different from the ceiling is way above us. But if the difference between way above us and even further above us, like, I don't care. Like, we lose in either one of those. I think there's a crux here if you think, humans are pretty close to the apex. But if not, then it's kind of all the same to me.
Okay. Yeah, that makes sense. And okay. I think instead of going too far down this route, I think we should probably just get into the debate. But that's interesting. I get what you're saying. That makes a lot of sense. So let me just for a second kind of just share my perspective on just kind of how I think about the world a little bit. And then let's just like start talking about AI a lot more directly. So essentially what I feel is that humans grew up in a kind of an ancestral environment in which they evolved. And you can say that like there were proto-humans and animals before that. And all of these organisms evolved in an environment which we can call our ancestral environment. And so we have this idea of like intelligence and understanding and consciousness, and we could define all these and go down those rabbit holes. But the point is we do have this thing called understanding. And what we understand, we tend to understand things well that fit within that evolutionary environment. So like, for example, if we find a rock on the ground, there were rocks on the ground throughout our evolutionary environment. So we have a really good mental model for how to utilize rocks. Like if I had a rock in my hand, I could throw it and I could approximate the trajectory of the throw, right? This is something that I intuitively understand. It's like an inbuilt model, and it's a type of thing that humans were evolved and basically optimized to do. And there are these models that are predictive for this type of a thing. Now, when we start talking about things that were outside of our ancestral environment, we start losing this ability to intuit the answer, and we start to be getting models that are less predictive as things become vastly different from the environment in which we grew up in. So let's give some examples of this. Rocks are absolutely in our ancestral environment. But what is a rock made out of? A rock, if you go all the way down, there's all these subatomic particles. And this is like up quarks and down quarks. And I'm not even going to pretend like I actually understand physics very well. But there's a lot of stuff going on there. And these are super complicated. And we barely have an understanding of what they do. But these subatomic particles are all interacting in some very complex way. And so that's like the micro state. That's like what composes a rock, is all these subatomic particles. But at a macro level, the system is a rock, and the system is something that we understand. So we can throw it, we know what it's going to do. It's going to follow the laws of gravity and all of these things, and we can make projectiles that are very advanced. But we cannot predict the behavior of a rock by analyzing the pieces, the subcomponents of the rock, which are the subatomic particles, which have multiple levels of abstraction upon which we can model it. So we can model subatomic particles, we can model the chemistry of the actual minerals, and we can also, go up another level and actually analyze the rock. So there's limits on when we start thinking about things in a different way than we did in the ancestral environment. We start losing our intuition, and we start losing our capacity to understand. And what we need to, it's possible we could develop a model and have enough compute maybe to simulate subatomic particle behavior and interactions and actually predict the behavior of them and have that actually affect, have those, by manipulating things within this level of abstraction, this very low level of abstraction, we might be able to one day change something at the macro level, like the behavior of a rock when you throw it. It's possible. but it's unlikely. We're not close to being able to do that.
Mind if I offer just a kind of a crisp example of that, and also verify that we're on the same page here?
Cool.
So like I remember in like high school chemistry and physics, you kind of have that like Bohr's model of the atom with electrons that are like orbiting around it, like little particles, like, you know, going in little orbits. But then you find out like that's actually not what's happening. There's like a probability field of like of an electron cloud, and the electron like has a probability of being at any given point. And that's like actually how it works, not just a state of our knowledge. And the same thing you get with like a atom might be able to jump through a surface because it's like acting in a sort of probabilistic sort of fashion in terms of how it's actually working. And this is something that's just so different from how we perceive the world, that we kind of use these, you know, classical models of like electrons orbiting around, even though it isn't really true, but it kind of works, and it more fits our intuitions. Also saw a lot of this in electrical engineering. The way electricity works is weird.
Okay,
you can use a metaphor, but it'll break down in certain cases.
Perfect. Okay. Amazing. Yeah, I completely agree. Okay. And so there's a lot of things though so basically when we start leaving our evolutionary environment, we have to now pause on any system that we encounter, and we have to realize that this is best modeled as a complex system. So like, let me give a few more examples just to really put this home. So, for example, we have a pretty good predictive model of human behavior. Like for example, like we can tell if someone's happy or sad, and we know like we can know if we want to get under someone's skin, what kind of insult can we say? We know like how to incentivize people. We can communicate very well. And this is because we have a theory of mind which developed through the process of evolution, and basically it approximates what another person is thinking. It has a model based on a lot of inputs that we can't even necessarily describe or disentangle. And it creates this model. And over time, people who have been able to understand what other people are thinking better have been more fit, and groups that have had this mutual ability to communicate more effectively have survived better than groups that didn't. So these forces actually refined this model of human cognition, and we have developed an ability to understand. And it's not perfect. You get things wrong all the time. Psychology is a field that there's some things we know, there's some things we don't know, and there's a lot of limits. Like I could think I know what you're thinking, I don't necessarily. But it is a thing where we do have a really good intuition about what other people are like, how other people think, and the types of things that other people might do. Now, this also works for groups of people, and for the same reasons. You can probably assume, like, you see a group of aggressive men coming at you, and you might get concerned, and maybe for good reason, right? Because they may very well take your stuff. Now, this works on a relatively small scale, but as you increase the scale, our intuition falls apart. And this is something that's very common. Like going back to this idea of subatomic particles, right? You have a few of these individual subatomic particles. You might be able to say certain things about their behavior, but we don't fully understand how we get these, when there's a very large number of these things, how we get this. We don't know the connection between the behavior of the subatomic particles and the actual macro behavior of the things that are composed of an astronomically large number of these. And this is just kind of a rule of complex systems, is that at different scales, we get these different models that are used to model the behavior. Like, so for example, you can maybe use psychology and theory of mind to predict what a person would do. But if you have many people, now there's a different field called microeconomics. And this is the best field of all the things that we've studied. We've had some models and some heuristics that could be used to sometimes, it's not even very accurate, but we can sometimes predict what people will do when they get together in a group. Now, if you aggregate many different markets, you end up having like what's called macroeconomics, which is at a much higher scale. And we found that it doesn't really work very well to use microeconomics on that macro level. And there's actually just different emergent behaviors that come when you're talking at very different scales. And this is something that time and time again is it happens. Like you have one cell, it's just a cell, you can study that. You have a bunch of cells, now there's an organism that has a completely different set of behaviors, and a completely different field of science is really needed to understand those macro behaviors, because to take one cell and extrapolate what that whole organism is going to look like is extremely difficult. So this is how I think about complex systems. And so just to I'm just going to tie this point really quick. So there's like things like economics. I don't believe that basically we do not understand the economy. Every time that a nation state has tried to have a command economy, it has failed. It has fallen apart because they haven't had access to the information, and they haven't been able to compute how they're going to allocate resources. So like a free market is a decentralized process. This is something that Hayek talked about. It's a decentralized process that coordinates the allocation of resources across the human society. And this process, no one person understands this process. It's complex, yet it still somehow yields a very good result, but no single person understands this. Similarly, the political process, I would argue, is also, like on the national level, politics is also something that you really are not going to be able to understand. It's a complex system. There are thousands or millions of different interest groups that are all negotiating, and the dynamics of what actually occurs on the national stage is something that's very unpredictable. One kind of consequence of my worldview is I actually don't really believe in political action, because I think that it's unlikely that you're going to be able to change the course of history as an individual. I think it's a complex system. You may be able to observe what happens on the macro level of what's happening in society, but you're not going to be able to take any action that's going to be able to influence the result in the direction that you want. So let's say that you want, for example, minimum wage to be $20 an hour. You could become an activist for that position, and you can advocate for it. And on the surface, it might look like you're making progress. Maybe you get together a bunch of people, you organize, and maybe you pass the legislation. I would argue that that is an illusion. You did not actually influence the outcome. Well, you did not, everything has a cause and effect. So you had an effect on the outcome, but you did not steer the outcome. You did not actually, you cannot actually know the degree and magnitude and the direction of your influence on this topic. The reason why that minimum wage legislation would have passed is because that's what society was already ready to do. Other people in society were already primed for this idea. You didn't do it. You just are basically looking into this complex system and seeing your reflection in it. You're not actually steering the results. For example, I'll just give one example of activism going awry. There was that activist judge who did not like Elon Musk. And this activist judge forced him to buy Twitter when he wanted to back out. Now, this person was people say, maybe I could be wrong about the situation, but people say this person was not a fan of Elon Musk and did not like the way that he was interacting with Twitter and wanted to basically force him to do this, even though this wasn't something that he wanted to do. Of course, we could argue, we can get into the specifics, and we could say that, hey, maybe this person actually was just unbiased and just going by the law. It's possible. I'm not trying to make a strong claim on that, but let's just, for the sake of argument, say this was an activist judge. A lot of people who didn't like Elon Musk wanted to force him to go through with acquiring Twitter for that high price. And so they wanted to push him in that direction. Well, it turns out now he's been able to use X as a political tool to advance his political agenda. So someone who was kind of pushing one way has had a unintended consequence of actually pushing things the other direction and giving the other side more power. And I mean, again, that's one anecdotal example, but it's to illustrate the point that since society is a complex system, we cannot take political action to actually sway the results of how it's going to behave on a macro level. And so I'll pause there and just say, what's your overall, where are you at with me on this?
Yeah, you said you were talking for quite a while there. So yeah. Which part of it would you like me to respond to? Did I say anything that you don't agree with about complex systems and our ability to predict and understand and
And like any of those analogies, do you see any holes in my application of that? Because I'm basically going to take this and I'm going to apply it to AI.
Sure. I'd say I probably agreed with the first half and disagreed with a lot of things in the second half.
Okay.
So I'll kind of start a little bit from the beginning. I think your description of complex systems was accurate. Mm-hmm. Actually, a kind of way I would think about this is there's like complexity and then there's complicated. And then complicated is a long sequence of steps. It's sequential reasoning. It can be as long as you like. You can have levels of abstraction to compress, looking at it. And this is something we do in programming all the time. And then complex can be a lot of steps, but it's mainly about lots of things interacting all at once. Mm-hmm. And the thing is that under what we call understanding or really conscious reasoning is generally using sequential reasoning. So the reason that complex systems are hard to understand is you're using one tool to understand something different. Mm-hmm. Complexity can be understood with complexity, and complicatedness can be understood with complicatedness, but trying to bridge between the two, there's translation problems. So what it means to understand a complex system is to build an intuition for it. I create a mental model that sort of matches the thing that I'm simulating, essentially. Mm-hmm. And that's done through kind of just jostling the connections inside your own mind, kind of gradually moving it in that direction. And basically the alternative to sequential reasoning is pattern recognition, is essentially what that is. You just kind of move towards better and better patterns. And so there is an understanding in that way, but it is because of the nature of how it's gone about, you're just kind of moving incrementally. There's going to be inaccuracies since a lot of it is about compressing information down into a model. There's going to be biases, and especially if the thing that you were training in or the experiences you were learning from are different from the environment you're now in. Mm-hmm. Well, now you've learned one set of patterns in a place where a different set of patterns apply. Mm-hmm. Moving on to another concept that you were talking about in terms of levels of abstraction, also agree with that. You could argue that chemistry is based on physics and biology is based on chemistry, but they're different disciplines. They're taught by different people for a reason. Mm-hmm. It's because when you're operating at a low level and you have lots of things operating together, technically that is all that's happening in a reductionist sort of sense, but the mind can only process a few pieces of information at a time. Yep. And since it's all interactive, you can't use the sequential kind of process. And so when you're dealing with that level, then you go up a level of abstraction and identify different patterns. And we notice that it's not just totally arbitrary where you pick these. There are different levels of scale where patterns start to emerge and be identifiable.
Yes.
So that kind of way of looking at things, I totally agree with all of that. Mm-hmm. And maybe have different words for describing it, but I think we're on the same page in those kind of things. The thing... There was okay. I'm not going to go into the Elon Musk kind of thing because that gets into
just an example. Could be
details of contract law, especially if we enter into a contract and we both agree to it, then we're held to it. I can't just back out and say I didn't actually want to be in this contract. And the judges say you're an adult, you made an agreement. Yeah. So the question there is was the communication that they had actually constitute a contract?
I'm not arguing a view on that. I'm saying we could just imagine it was an activist judge. Let's just imagine then that would have backfired. It's plausible. It's just an example of activism backfiring. And of course, one example doesn't prove that it happens. It's just my proof is in the other statements that it's a complex system. Therefore, you can't. It's not. I'm not saying
that's great. I'm happy to move past that, and even whether it backfired. The thing that I'm wanting to speak to more that I think is a little bit more significant is this idea that activism doesn't work because individuals have no agency over the course of history. And I think this view was, articulated in a very enjoyable sort of way in Isaac Asimov's Foundation series, when they posited this idea of psychohistory, where if you just kind of understand the underlying rules, well, individuals are chaotic and unpredictable, but society as a whole, you can get down to mathematical precision. And then he, had by setting the right initial conditions, he was able to create the society that lasted for thousands of years and conquered the galaxy and predicted the fall of the old empire and all these old sort of things. And the only thing that challenged it was when you got this one crazy individual who had these amazing psychic powers and could dominate the entire universe by himself. And because that was an individual, it couldn't be calculated. And so like that's kind of if you take that viewpoint to its logical extreme, then that sort of thing is like what becomes possible. And yeah, I don't believe that's true. In addition to there being, so even if you put aside the difficulty of like figuring out the complexity on that level, because like that's one challenge, there's also another issue of chaos where a small thing can have ripple effects that expand outwards.
Yes.
So if you've heard of like the butterfly effect, where a butterfly flapping its wings causes a tornado somewhere else, like that's not a real thing. But the idea of it is that is basically feedback loops. Some things you push in one direction, there's a force pushing back. There are other things you push in a direction and then it gets amplified more and more and more. And eventually you don't even need to push anymore because it's a force on its own. So that's kind of creates a sense of like unpredictability to things, is complexity and also chaos.
Yes, absolutely.
I think you'd probably agree with that, but this is just, background kind of things. And it's also not really directly relevant to the question of like whether individual actions work or not. So the first kind of challenge is that, well, yeah, there are these larger impersonal forces that are bigger than any one person, but what are those big impersonal forces ultimately composed of? Like there isn't a society that exists independently in some separate substrate. Like it's made up of individuals. So the idea that individuals have no impact seems a little strange just on that level. But I think where I go in kind of a confusion in terms of a resolution on this, or my proposition as to where I think this actually ends up going, is that there's actually kind of a mix. There is some extent to which individual actions get subsumed by larger forces. In your hypothetical example with Elon Musk and the judge, maybe that works. But there's also, there isn't just one. So I'll say that society moves towards an equilibrium. And I think that's kind of the underlying point that you're getting at.
Okay.
However, there isn't just one equilibrium that we're predetermined to go towards. There are branching points where at a certain place we're a little bit chaotic. We can move a lot in one direction or another, and that might go one way, it might go a different way, and both of those are stable equilibria. And which way we take at that branching point, then it matters a lot. When you're in equilibria, then it's kind of hard to get out unless it's disrupting the system to make it move somewhere else or pick which branch it goes towards. I think that would be my kind of overall view.
I would actually 100% agree with everything you just said. So I don't agree with this like psychohistory. I mean, there's some truth to it, I think, on some level, but there are problems with that. And so what I would say is that you're bringing up chaos was absolutely great and great explanation. This was perfect. I completely agree. So what I would say, and I do want to tie this to AI, but what I would say is that yes, there are these branch points and there are these different possible universes that we could be in, and everything is stochastic. So for example, let's say you did have the psychohistory. Well, there's still tail risk. It's going to be a heuristic. It's not going to be perfectly predictive. There's uncertainty that you can't know. So maybe you can model certain things, but you're not going to be sure about it. Your model is not necessarily going to be right. But and I want to talk about how we would get that model if we were to have one. But before I do that, the point that I'm making is, yes, we might be at lots of different branch points and things could have gone many different ways. But you as an individual are not able to see that you're in a branch point, and you're not able to consciously choose between two universes. Like, you can take what you perceive to be a consequential decision, but you don't actually have any sense for the degree to which your decision is consequential in steering towards a specific outcome. Especially, I mean, I think at a small scale you can when you're dealing with small groups, but when you're dealing with, like, if you assassinate the emperor, what does that do? What does that do 100 years from now? How does that change the outcome? Like, does the butterfly that's flapping its wings and creating the hypothetical tornado, yes, it did. It did do that. It did cause it. If it didn't do it, it wouldn't have happened. It did, but it couldn't have intentionally caused a tornado. You get what I'm saying? You see the nuance there? It's like you cannot actually steer the course of history as an individual. Can curious on your
Yeah,
thoughts.
sure. So I'll make sure I'm understanding that right. You're actually, so it kind of sounds to me like you're admitting the possibility of individual agency, but it wouldn't be combined with conscious awareness of that agency as it's being performed. So in a way, from like one's own perspective, it's kind of the same as not having agency, because like you don't really know the impacts of your actions on the world.
Yeah, that's pretty close. Basically, yes, everything happens for a reason. It happens because people take actions. Those actions are consequential. It's just that you cannot predict the direction and the magnitude of any given individual choice on a medium-term prediction. You can do a short-term prediction. And I think there's just basically an illusion that makes you feel like you're making a difference when in reality, it's actually a complex system that's the combined interests of all the billions of people in the world, all in tension with each other, creating these political systems that you are not able to steer, even if you take what you consider to be a big position, like a big, if you like something that you think is consequential, it's like you're not shaping the future, basically. I say the future is overdetermined, and you are also, you may make a difference in the future, but you don't know what that difference is going to be because fundamentally it's not predictable.
So one thing I'll bring up here is that I don't think it needs to be all or nothing. That like either I'm making a choice and I do this and I know we've switched from this branch to that branch, but I think there is like in between knowing the reasons of like the effects of your action versus just total unpredictable chaos. There's also a whole range in between that's probabilism of if I act in this way, that, pushes the probability in a little bit of a way that I like. Whereas if I act in this way, that pushes the probability somewhat in a direction that I don't like. The other kind of issue here besides knowingness is just the size, the scale of one's actions. And like individuals are part of a collective. Myself as like my own volunteering work at Pause AI, for example, like I don't expect that to be a key determining factor in really anything particularly significant beyond maybe like forming a local branch or connections with individual people. But like I would see it as entirely plausible that I'm feeding into a positive feedback loop. And not just like acting at random and pushing against negative feedback loops, but if you act with some like strategic and awareness, then you can be putting your energy into things that have positive feedback and amplify themselves. So for example, if you like do something that convinces like 2 or 3 other people and each of them do the same thing, you get a little bit of that cascade. And so if you put enough force into positive feedback loops, then that collective as a whole, then it pushes things in, has a larger scale of an impact. And then if that is working in some sort of tactical way, then again, it's working in a probabilistic form of pushing where things go, again, with uncertainty, with probabilism, along branches at a larger scale.
Yeah, and so I think this is an important disagreement between us. I think you say a lot of things that are right. I just think there's a few details that you're getting wrong. Maybe I'm not communicating my position fully clearly. I don't want to get too lost in the weeds. And by the way, like if you want to direct this conversation too, I'm technically hosting this, but like please, you can also direct us. So I don't mean to dominate this. But what I would say,
I think what we're talking about right now is very relevant to Pause AI. I don't think it's very relevant to AI Doom. So I think I'll leave that to what you want the focus of this conversation to be. Okay,
I will actually say that I think it's the opposite. I don't think it's very relevant to Pause AI because of a different reason. But I don't think we need to. We don't need to go into that. Maybe at the end we can talk about. I do like Pause AI. I think it's cool. But so the point is though So let's see if this actually. So I think that we just have a fundamental difference in. Well, maybe it's not fundamental, but we do see these complex systems differently, and there is kind of a scenario in which you are intuitively saying, I think we can actually steer this complex system, and there's like a certain level of predictability that we do have on like society as an example of a very large complex system of many different individuals. You do think that that's something that can be steered to some extent, and I don't. And that's like one edge case of one particular complex system. Maybe there's something peculiar about it that we're able to steer. Whereas I think we both agree, like you're not going to be able to, I'm sure we agree on almost all these other complex systems we've mentioned about the degree to which we can understand them. So let's put this aside, but we might come back to it.
I want to clarify that. You think complex systems cannot be steered? Is this like, I want to know how general that statement is.
Yeah. So, okay. Perfect. Okay. Let's get into this. So, how do we, so a rock, let's go back to this example of a rock. Okay. It is a complex system, but it's a complex system on a certain level.
Kind of breaking up on my end.
Oh, sorry. Okay. Can you hear me now?
Bits and pieces.
Okay. That is odd.
You're back.
I'm back. Okay. Apologies. Okay. So let's take an example of a complex system. A rock. Okay. A rock is actually a complex system. It's a complex system on the level of subatomic particles. Many subatomic particles interacting, and there's many different levels upon which you can model it. And at each of those, you can, they have their own rules, but then at some level, there's just a rock. And a rock is very simple. It's very easy to model. You wouldn't think of it as a complex system because the way in which we typically interact with a rock is going to be simple. It's going to be something, it could even be a complicated rock or something, right? There's things to learn about it, but it's going to not be complex. And so why is it simple? It's because we have a model of understanding for how it works. Like we have these macro level rules that apply to objects like Newton's laws, right? These Newton's laws apply to objects that are going under a certain speed, and it really accurately describes their trajectory and like how you should think about them. Now, of course, if you push things to the limit, now you start bringing in like Einstein as things are going very fast. Newton's laws fall apart, but we can maybe just use Einstein instead of Newton because we have that type of an understanding. But it's just an example that basically this is a rule that models the macro level behavior of this collection of subatomic particles. And the thing is like, so we have this idea of gravity. We're on Earth. We throw this rock. There's gravity. It pulls it down. This is very obvious, very simple. It's a literal, such simple math. Like literally high schoolers can do the full math for modeling this type of trajectory. This is like very basic. Yet the subatomic particles, it's a very complicated thing that we don't fully understand. And it does have, and these things do have gravity, at play. So like there are like, gravitational waves and particles that are like, I don't even know what they call them, but there's ones that are responsible for the gravitational field. Presumably, again, I honestly, I'm so out of my depth on this subject. I'm just trying to give an example. But there is presumably a possibility of like anti-gravity. There are potentially things you could do to these subatomic particles at that level of abstraction that could make a rock go up or behave with a different trajectory. I think all forces are related to these subatomic particles. And if you did the right things and manipulated these micro states, you could potentially make a rock do something that violates our model. So like, there's this idea of micro states and macro states. And like the macro state would be like a behavior it does, like a condition or a behavior at that macro level, which is the composite of all these things. So like the law of entropy will push everything everything towards like a most stable macro state, like meaning the gas will be evenly distributed in a tank or something along those lines. But the actual individual molecules could be in many different configurations, and you don't actually know what those microstates would be. So does that are we on the same page about this?
I mean, I think so far, yeah.
Okay.
Objects have lots of component parts into them. If you look them at a really small level of detail, they get super complicated, or super complex. Yeah, I'm with you so far.
So if something is a complex system, essentially, so a rock is a complex system in one sense, and it is a simple system on another sense. At the macro level and the normal conditions, a rock is simple. But if you go and you look at it kind of in a way that's outside of our models, then it starts to be complex. And it's possible that we could actually figure this all out. One, it would take a lot of computational power. There'd be a lot of other things we'd have to take into consideration. But two, we would need to figure out the laws that govern this system. So for example, let me back up for 1 second. Basically, this is my answer to you. The way that we understand any system is that, like, our default assumption must be that something is a complex system that we cannot understand. And we have to actually do essentially the scientific method in order to build up a model of any given system, including a rock. If you have to actually study the system at that macro level and get actual empirical data, and then statistically analyze that data in order to build a model for how to reliably predict any given system. And so in the case of a rock, we have an intuitive understanding. This type of signal extraction was performed by the evolutionary process. So we have an intuition that's very accurate about these basic the basic dynamics of how a rock works. But then there's other things like medicine. We don't know that medicine is going to work until we actually do studies and see the effect it has on the body. Otherwise, we can't predict with a large degree of confidence that medicine is going to work. And usually when we do, it's because it's very similar to another medicine, and we have basic mechanistic things. But there's a lot of scientific method that's being used there to build up these models. And so that's why economics has continuously failed to predict things. Economists are horrible at predicting things because they're really not able to apply the scientific method and run experiments on populations. I mean, that's almost extremely unethical if you think about it. So economics has largely been a failed field because of this.
Right. So if I can compress a lot of that down, like with things like we can predict the behavior of a rock as a whole because of like laws of physics. But the thing is with like physics, we don't know the laws of physics because we just broke into the source code for the universe. Mm-hmm. It's because we've made lots of observations about how things move around in the world. And then, came up with lots of those descriptions, found that a lot of those descriptions could be progressively compressed into just a smaller and smaller set of equations, and then found those like, hey, when we just have these like few equations, this actually predicts a ton of stuff very well. But then that kind of reasoning doesn't necessarily work for some fields like economics. And I would describe the difference there as being economics is just fundamentally more chaotic, like at least at that level of abstraction, than the rock is on the level of physics. I don't see where we disagree or what your point is.
Yeah, so my point is that the way that we understand things is from a process of gathering empirical data and extracting a statistically significant signal from that data such that we can build a model that can predict its behavior with a high degree of likelihood. We don't do this ever through a priori reasoning. We never do that. We never understand things through logical deduction. That's just simply not a valid method of predicting how things will behave in a real world. And a lot of things that we have, like even in the case of something simple like a rock, we have performed the scientific method via evolution. So we have a predictive model for basic, what do you call that? What is the thing we call projectiles? A basic, these basic natural laws of physics, this intuition. We built this type of a thing up. Theory of mind is a model for predicting human behavior. We built this up through evolution, but really what it's been doing is essentially running something that's similar to the scientific method where it takes a prediction, it tests it, and based on that, it will select the version that was more predictive. And that's a similar process to doing a scientific study. And so the things that we're able to run experiments on, I would say that, economic society is not necessarily more complex or chaotic than the human body, or than any other things that we study. But the greater the extent to which we are able to run scientific experiments on things is the greater extent to which we're able to determine what are those macro level principles that heuristically estimate the behavior. So basically the point is there's not an intuitive, there's not like an a priori understanding of how a rock works. We actually collected empirical data to have that model that predicts its behavior. And also it's within a very constrained set of conditions when we're actually estimating it in most cases. And
Let me
yeah,
ask you something, because I think it gets important. So, like,
yeah.
all right, so we didn't know how a rock works a priori,
Yes.
and we figured that out through a lot of experimentation.
Mm-hmm.
Now, have you ever thrown one of these before?
No, I have not.
Well, can you guess what would happen, what its trajectory would be if I tossed it, up in the air from one hand to the other?
I can absolutely. Yes. You can transfer that.
Right.
Yeah, there's
because
an analogy. Yeah.
you've had observations with similar things.
Absolutely.
And you kind of infer that, hey, this has the properties that matter. Now, you might be wrong. This might be there's some optical illusion here where it's like not actually have the substance you think it is. But like basically the thing is I have a lot of experience with rocks. They're not rockiness, or the fact that they're made out of granite is not the controlling factor here. It's the fact that it's like condensed mass and that sort of thing. This has some of those key abstracted out properties. And so I can make inferences about it, even though I've never seen it before.
Absolutely.
And I would say like in a way, it's kind of like a priori because you've never seen the object before, but it really isn't because like there's similarity.
I 100% agree with that. Thank you. That really was a great way of explaining that. And this is absolutely something I agree with. And I was taking into account. So the degree to which I can take one predictive model, which by the way, I've never like thrown that many rocks anyway. So this was already applied in general to rocks. But if you take one predictive model and map it to another predictive model, that's totally a possible thing to do. But the degree to which the thing is similar to the other thing is the degree to which that is accurate. So if it was a very large object that we were somehow launching, now it would actually have different behaviors. It would be affected with gravity in different ways. And I'm not going to go into physics that I don't understand. As you go at high speeds, it has different behaviors. If it's very small, it has different behaviors. The quantum stuff, I think, right? So the degree to which, and then, maybe there's something that has like, it's not very dense. So you throw it and it goes into some very unintuitive way or whatever. I'm not going to keep going down this path, but the point is the degree to which it's similar is the degree to which you can map that prediction. And as things get very different, then that prediction starts to break down. And this is a very big problem for AI when we try to make these analogies, but yet we're talking about something that is actually quite different than the thing that we're analogizing it to. So you can't actually make this type of thing. And this actually comes up a lot in science. This is something that people are very concerned about. Like, let's say that you're making a medicine. There's certain types of things where you can make like two things, they're both going after the same target. When you're designing a medicine, you can kind of say, we know these are similar, so we can predict these are going to behave very similarly as each other. And maybe you'll have good reason to believe, without actually doing an experiment, you'll have good reason to believe that you're actually going to have an effect on the body that you think you're going to have, because you know how something else works that's similar. But if you don't have that level of similarity, it's just been proven time and time again that you can't just take some novel molecule and just assume that you know what it's going to do. You really have no idea. And this is something, that lots of people have done, and it's been replicated, this type of principle. So that's what I would say. Do you agree with that?
Yes, I'd say if you're going to have good intuitions about things you've never seen before, then you need to analogize it to the right things.
Yes.
You need to focus on the correct variables. And I can see where you're going with this now with AI, since that is a novel thing. And I think this kind of the open question here is, in terms of making predictions about it and what we should set as our default intuitions, the core question is like, what do we analogize this to? What is the most important things about it that we should focus on? In my view, that's exactly why I agree with Eliezer and I disagree with people like Jan LeCun, is because I think of like which analogies they're sticking to. I think one group is right, and I think the other group's picking the wrong things.
Cool. Yeah, that makes a lot of sense. So yeah, let's dive into that then, actually, because I think we've been talking about this foundational stuff a bit for a while. And by the way, do you have like a time that you're done? Because I know we've gone over. We could.
Not really. No.
Okay. Cool. So yeah, I don't want to keep you longer than you have time for.
I mean, there's a limit to how long you're going to want the episode to be, so that you can maybe calibrate on that.
All right. And if we have to, we could do a part 2 potentially or something. But all right. Sure. So. Yeah, let's talk about this. So what is your default assumption for how you think we should think about AI like as a baseline?
Yeah. So I think The basic model of agency and like things having goals or being directed, I'm a little less certain about it now because of simulator theory, but I think it's valid enough to be very much worth considering, even currently. And so basically, I think of things that if something has a goal and it's really good at reaching it, and it's better at like navigating around obstacles than other things are at creating obstacles, then the end result to expect is the thing that it wants, it gets. And another, in terms of like a reference class analogy, I think a lot about humans and our effect on the biosphere. So for a very long time, evolution was this kind of constant arms race. A predator evolves, better at chasing things, and then the prey evolves to be better at running away. And everything kind of keeps itself in balance because it's all following the same rules of evolution. But then humans came around, and we got like just past some critical threshold of cognitive ability, and we had this gained this ability to not just reason, but to communicate, to pass on culture generation to generation, to write things down eventually. And with that, we were able to accumulate cognitive abilities at a rate that was unbounded from just like building up brain size and evolutionary sort of things. So our rate of capability and like power in the environment just skyrocketed. It went way past what any other species could evolve to keep up with a little bit of an exception of viruses. And for that reason, now suddenly, like any other apex predator, you have like polar bears are dominant in tundras, and cheetahs or lions might be in a desert, in a jungle or somewhere else. But humans are able to be an apex predator everywhere. In the tundra and the deserts and the jungle, and also build cities and all kinds of other things. So like this cognitive ability and ability to pass information on us specifically gave us broke the rules of the game and gave us this competitive super advantage. And now we are building systems that has that thing, however you want to define it, like what exactly it is this intelligence is. I've seen a lot of debates about that. Yeah. But whatever it is, we are building something that has more of it. And we don't have a really rigorous sense of how to aim it at a appropriate goal, a goal that is human compatible. And my thought is how on earth does this go well? I'll start with that.
Okay. And then really quick before I respond, I'm just curious, do you think that, let's say we were new to this subject, just entering, we never thought about it, we didn't read all this stuff that you've researched. Would you say that your default assumption would be that AI wouldn't kill us, or is that it would kill us, or that it's 50-50, we just have no idea?
It depends where I was. So yeah. I'd say my intuition on this is informed when I'm talking to people who are new to the subject. Yeah. And so I'll just assume that my intuitions would be about the same as most people I speak to. Okay. And so the intuitions I very clearly see, there's very much of a pattern here, is that first there's an intuition that machines can't possibly compete with humans on intelligence, at least in terms of generality. An AI could never be truly creative. It could never truly reason or think or plan or all these other sorts of things. And so that's one set of intuition, is kind of AI skepticism. I think I'd say is sort of a baseline, and I'd say I probably shared this at some point. Okay. Then once you get past that, and show them, hey, this is how neural networks function. Here are some surprising things that it's done that we never thought computers would be capable of. Then the next thing is, I'd say that the AI doom theory that, hey, this doesn't go well, this is really scary, is the second a kind of assumed intuitive sort of thing. Okay. Can I pause? Okay, go on. Sorry. Go ahead. I'm saying this based on not rigorous
conversations. I think what you're saying is completely accurate. I don't agree. I agree that those are the intuitions that a lot of people have. Okay, but I think one of those you would agree with, and one of those you wouldn't, because you are concerned that it will kill us, but you definitely don't. I don't think you would think that it's not going to get those capabilities. So one of those intuitions you think is wrong, and one of those you think is right. Is that a correct characterization of your current positions?
Sure. Although I think I would have changed my mind about AI's capabilities quite a while ago.
Oh, sure. Sure.
So like prior to ChatGPT taking off, honestly, like the first time I read a description of how a single artificial neuron works, for me at that point, it was pretty clear that like, oh yeah, people are going to figure this out. Because like it's a flexible logic gate essentially, and if you link those together, you have something that's Turing complete. It can handle complexity. Like immediately, I don't see any fundamental barriers.
Cool.
And this was before I learned programming.
Yeah. So I guess though my point of asking that was not to ask like what would be your intuitions initially, but it's like what would be your starting point. So like let's say like Yudkowsky makes some really good points. Like he lays out an argument, and maybe there's someone you like more. You can let me know because I'd actually be curious on like who your influences are. But let's just take Yudkowsky because he is one of the goats in this field. So Yudkowsky makes some great arguments. So if you haven't read his arguments, right, what would be like like not something necessarily based on intuition, but like what would be like the default? Like that's the reason he makes those arguments, right? Would be to like convince you of something that's either, I mean, maybe you already believed it. Like maybe you're saying, look, this is basically, if we were not to know anything about this subject, like there's like a null hypothesis, right? What is the null hypothesis? Like for example, is this herb going to cure cancer? The null hypothesis is no, it's not, right? Now you could say, is this safe, right? Is this going to kill you? Maybe the null hypothesis would be no, it's not safe. Like there's a lot of ways you could think about this. I'm just curious, like where are you starting before you start seeing these good arguments in favor, or are you just do you have a view of like what your baseline estimation would be, like a dispassionate, not something that's like fooled by any sort of like maybe like cognitive bias or just like naivete, just like if you're trying to approach this scientifically and rigorously, where would you be starting? Would you be starting from a point of skepticism, or would you say like, we need to prove that this is even safe?
I think it depends how you frame the question.
Yeah,
sure.
So
if some startup comes to me and says like, our product is going to totally change the world, and like the world's going to be totally unrecognizable in 20 years. And by the way, it might actually kill everyone. Like that would be, yeah, I doubt it. On the other hand, if you tell me like they are creating a new form of intelligence that has more of the thing that made people dominant in the world, and that's being released out into the world and based on a profit motive, like build it as fast as we can with no guardrails kind of mindset, and that's how the question was framed to me, then I'd say, oh my God, that's going to be terrible.
Yeah. Okay. Okay. I think I see what you're saying. So going back to what you're saying, and you actually just touched on this again. So you basically, like, let me ask you this, because you're saying, okay, this thing has intelligence. It's very good at having intelligence, and it has very high amounts, and that means that we need to be worried about it. And you kind of like drew this analogy of humans coming into, a certain level, like they got to this certain level, and then all of a sudden they started just taking off, dominating the environment. Basically, we can, like, any animal is like screwed if it's up against us, and we make a lot of animals go extinct every single year. We're like building in their wetlands and they're dead, right? So this obviously has happened. There is like extinction risk from other things, from other like organisms, and however you want to conceptualize that. So I grant that's true, but do you think that intelligence, it increases, like, let me ask you this. Do you think that humans will outlive all other animals?
All other animals?
Yeah. Like let's say humans will, we all, okay, can we both agree?
Yeah,
humans
I
will
haven't
die.
given that a lot of thought. Probably not.
Okay.
Like, yeah, I would imagine bacteria living in the cracks underneath the Earth's surface would probably outlast us unless something very strange happens.
Oh, sure. And of course,
or we get the post-singularity kind of stuff.
Yeah.
And like spread out the stars, then we might outlast anything that currently exists in the world.
Cool.
But sure.
Yeah, no, right. So I'm on the same page as you. First of all, I do think we are all going to die no matter what. Like, it's going to be from AI or from something else. We're going to all, at some point, on a long enough time horizon, like, we're going to die. I think that that's true. And I think, and I agree with you, that humans are probably not, they could, because anything is possible. Like, this is a probabilistic thing. It's not 100%. I'm not saying I know the future with 100%. You aren't either. But probably humans will die before a lot of other animals die. But it's also true that humans have killed off completely a lot of entire species. That's all true. So, but then what that kind of poses is this issue where it clearly intelligence does not per se indicate Darwinian fitness. So the most intelligent thing is not the thing that outlives everyone. And we haven't killed all animals. There's a lot of species that are not killed off by us. So something intelligent doesn't necessarily kill all of you. Maybe it kills some of you. That's a different conversation, I think, than the X-risk conversation. But humans haven't intentionally made all animals go extinct. And two, humans are probably not going to outlive a lot of other animals. So why is AI different?
And I think if you look at like the kind of animals that go extinct and the ones that don't, there's pretty clear pattern there, which is like the megafauna, like the really big animals. Those are pretty much all gone. Yeah. And you kind of get like somewhat megafauna with like things like elephants, although those are pretty endangered and would be gone if we weren't actively taking efforts to like keep them alive or make sure that people don't kill all of them. And then the further you go down, like if you get to like mice or cockroaches, then those are things we probably could kill off, like if we really wanted to, but we don't really want to. And our aims are just not that far at cross purposes. And then when you get even smaller to things like bacteria and viruses, that's something where we would need like technology that's like not even imaginable yet to be able to, and also intentionality to make those go away. It would probably also be at quite a bit of a sacrifice. It wouldn't be in our own best interests.
Yeah, I mean, we are actually bacterial in our nature. We have bacteria that's part of our body. But yeah, continue.
Precisely. So I think the thing that the reason that some forms of animals will like outlast us is because they just live in different niches than we live in. We're also being very high up in the food chain. We kind of rely on quite a lot of ecosystem for people to exist. So like you can imagine a tribe of like hunter-gatherers. They seem like they live a very simple lifestyle, don't need very much, just a little bit of food, a little bit of shelter, all that, those sort of things. But hey, like if you're going to hunt a buffalo, that means you need like a whole herd of those to keep their population alive. You need grasses for them to feed on. You need like water for the grass. Like you need a lot of ecosystem if you consider the entire chain to keep people alive. And so we can't just hide in the cracks the way bacteria would be able to. So the reason I would see AI as being different is if it starts doing something like expanding across the world and turning a lot of land into data centers or solar farms, or is churning out lots of toxic chemicals into the water and into the air. Bacteria might survive that, but humans would have a very hard time of it, because if every acre of land, you don't have like a pristine area of land the size of a valley or an island or something like that anywhere. I don't see where people would be able to survive in that kind of context. And really, even if there is some weird reason why a small group of people survive, that's a really bad thing to avoid, and it's debatable whether you call that doom or not.
Okay. Yeah. I think 0 is a special number. I think, I mean, it would be horrible. Like I don't want everyone, like that would be very bad, but it is maybe like worth even having a whole different debate where we just talk about different things. That's what we're going to be worried about. I think it's good to talk about everyone dying unless you want to not make that claim. So I think, okay, that makes sense. So basically you agree with me that something being intelligent does not, as far as we can tell, really have much to do. I mean, I can't see any connection between Darwinian fitness in the abstract and what we call intelligence. I'm not seeing any correlation.
So, I mean, there aren't 8 billion gorillas in the world. I think that's for a reason. So I think intelligence does something for us.
There's a lot of things that do different things for a lot of different species. So there's a lot of reasons why there's a certain number of gorillas and a certain number of humans, and way more ants and way more of this and that, right? So, there may be like some connection to the number of separate organisms. But we can talk about that potentially, but intelligent, like I don't think that you would make a list of like the most intelligent animals and then say, here's the dumbest animal. This is going to die first. Then this is going to die second. You would, if you were to like rank what you think is going to die, it would probably be looking relatively random. I'm sure we could extract some trends in that list, but like humans are not going to die before like this endangered bird that only lives in this certain wetlands and we're building condos there. Like that's going to die first for sure. There's no question. That's a dumb bird. But humans are going to die somewhere on that list. Probably before cockroaches, which are dumb, even dumber than the bird, right? Probably before ants, which are dumber than the bird. And, you know, you can and then gorillas are more, you know, rats are dumber than gorillas. I'm just making this up. Actually, I think that is true. So rats and apes are more, but rats might live longer than apes. So it's all over the place, right? I'm not seeing a clear trend. It's certainly not like a deterministic thing, like the most intelligent thing definitely is going to live longer. That's certainly not true. But what's also, I would even go further, and we don't need to get stuck on this point, but I would go further and to say that I don't see a particular, connection between intelligence and Darwinian fitness.
Okay. Yeah. I'm not sure where to start on that one. So what is intelligence?
Hold on. Let me tell you, let me just maybe tie this in more to what you were saying. So what you're saying is that you are worried that it's not because AI is intelligent per se, not like alone. The fact that AI is intelligent is not the reason you think it's going to kill us. It's more than that. It's intelligent and it might like want to use all the land on Earth to build data centers or something along those lines. There's extra conclusions. It's not mere intelligence that causes doom. It's more than that. Do you agree?
I mean, there has to be some mechanism that it's working by. It's not just going to use like, oh, I have, you know, an IQ of 1 billion, so I'm just going to poof you out of existence because I want to, because of, you know, mental magic. That there's going to be like some, you know, physical kind of thing that happens. What I see, like, ultimately the thing that matters is capability. And the thing where intelligence fits into the picture is it allows you to create new capabilities that you don't already have, leveraging capabilities you have. So for example, if I have a couple of sticks, if I don't have intelligence, all I have is a couple of sticks. If I have intelligence, then there's everything I can make with those sticks, and then everything I can make with those assemblages, and so on.
Yeah. Right. Yeah. I get what you're saying. And so like that would be something that would be really relevant, especially when you're talking about a war or some sort of conflict or competition between two species, as an example. So humans versus gorillas. I mean, come on. It's not even a joke. It's a joke. It's like obvious humans will destroy gorillas in a battle, assuming they have weapons and whatnot. But so AI, similarly, you can assume there's a very advanced AI and you could imagine it would beat humans in a war. I think we could talk about the specifics of that. Maybe there's some problems sometimes in those scenarios, but roughly I agree. That's a good point. But that does not indicate how long something will survive in the universe, right? So there's natural forces that are acting on all species, and not just species, all things. The Earth itself is subjected to natural forces. And something at one point will destroy the Earth. So all things have some longevity, some lifespan, right? Including humanity. And so humans are not going to be the last, since we're the most intelligent animal, we are not going to be the last animal to die. We're going to die before a lot of other animals, I think at least, and I think you agree. So intelligence doesn't necessarily mean that we're going to be around. But do I think that another animal is going to kill us? Like, do I think that tigers are going to come and kill us? No, I don't. I don't think that at all. I think we're going to die for other reasons because of natural forces in the universe. It could be AI even, or it could be something else that kills us. I'm not saying what it is. I don't know. And like, I think everyone agrees, even doomers agree. Like, it could be that we get nuclear holocaust this year and we never get AGI and we not die for that reason, right? So there's a lot of things that can kill us. And, even though we are intelligent, and if you take a step back and you don't frame this as like a war or a direct competition, if that's the way that you look at it, and I do see how they could crowd us out. It's possible how AI could crowd us out. But if you just look at it a priori, you say, look, it's intelligent. That's all we know about it. We're not going to make any other claims. You can't just say, because it's intelligent, therefore it will kill us. You can't say that.
Sure, I would agree that the survivability of a species is not a single variable equation with intelligence as the only thing. I'd also agree that if the only thing we knew about AI was that it was intelligent, then it would necessarily destroy us. It would give me a lot of cause for concern because like that's to me like the biggest like hardest to move variable of the things that matter. But also like I agree again with the idea of like, you know, human intelligence not being a cause for us like to outlive all other animals, especially given my own belief that the way we all die off is by using our intelligence but without wisdom to create AI that kills us.
Absolutely.
So like it's literally our intelligence killing us in that sense.
Yeah, curiosity killed the cat.
So yeah. I guess I agree to those foundational building blocks. I can tell I disagree with where you're going with it, but I'd rather wait till that actually comes out.
So it's not mere intelligence. It's something else that we know about AI that maybe allows its behavior to converge on something that kills us. Okay, maybe let's advance this argument a little bit. But before we do that, because I do want to know like what kind of things we do know about AI, and I might disagree about the extent to which we know certain things about AI. But first, I want to ask you, like, do you agree that a random number generator will not kill us? So if we have a random number generator, it's essentially it's like roughly the same thing. The difference between a random number generator and an AGI neural network is that the random number generator is random and the AGI is not random, right? So like, I mean, you could debate on if there's true randomness, but like fundamentally, right, there's some outputs that are being output by this function that's executing on a computer, right? And so if you were to run a random number generator, it's not different in nature necessarily, except for the fact that all the outputs are uniformly distributed and random. There's nothing else different about it rather than like an AGI. Do you kind of agree with that framing?
I mean, I would agree that the rand function in any of the game designs that I work isn't going to blow up in my face. If I were to put it in the context, which I'm sure is not
a great analogy
here, but like I think kind of points to what you're getting at is if, say, you had a artificial superintelligence and its goal was to output the most random possible number and the most of those numbers as possible, and that pointed towards some instrumental open-ended things of, well, I need to acquire as much compute resources as I can so I can get these perfect random numbers, and like there's no limit as to how far I can take that. Then that would be dangerous, but that's kind of bringing other things in.
Yeah, I'm not talking about that. I'm just talking about something that basically, like if you could somehow like listen to like the noise and like use like a lava lamp wall and you measure the randomness on this wall and make a random number generator. The thing that's different about that and an AI is that would be random. And this might be like a very weird point to kind of get stuck on, but it's actually, there's a point why I'm saying this. The difference between an AI and a random number generator is the fact that the random number generator is random and the AI is not random. There's no other like intangible thing. Like some people say, oh, AI will never be like humans because humans have a soul, right? Humans have a soul and AI just can never do this creativity that we have. That's of course wrong. That's not true. I think we can all agree finally it's not that's like ridiculous. AI can be very creative. But in its nature, essentially, right? Like there's some code that's executing, it does something, and the output of a random number generator is just a string of bytes, right? And these bytes are uniformly distributed if it's a good random number generator, right? And for AI, it's also a string of bytes, but and we're not able to predict it, to be clear, because we don't know what it's going to do. It's smarter than us, so we can't fully predict it. Maybe there's something about it we can predict, but it puts out a string of bytes as well. It's also software. They're both in essence software. And except the difference is that the actions that an AI takes will be intelligent actions, whereas a random number generator will probably not even take any sort of coherent action whatsoever. It'll just be all over the place. Like maybe there's some usefulness of like a random number generator in a game for like a really like dumb NPC or something like that, in terms of like steering its actions, but it's not the same thing as intelligence. So do you kind of see this parallel basically?
The assertion you're making sounds kind of trivial, so just agree to it and then see where you're going with it.
Okay. So, but like, I would say that I am concerned about the output of a random number generator if we ran it for long enough. Because, in theory, because eventually a random number generator would output a string of bytes that would do something that could be very harmful. Now, it's astronomically unlikely. It's like ridiculous to think that this would happen. Like, I'm not concerned. I'm not actually concerned. But in theory, just like having infinite monkeys on a typewriter, you would produce the works of Shakespeare because they'd just be typing away. And then, like, at some point on an infinite time scale, you would be creating the full works of Shakespeare. Similarly, like a random number generator would kill us all in the same way.
So you run enough random numbers, eventually you get like a computer virus that destroys everything if you allow for infinite time,
Yes.
kind of like the monkeys on typewriters. Yeah. So no, I am not worried in any practical sense about this kind of random number generator or about monkeys on typewriters or anything similar.
Okay, cool. Yeah. So we established this baseline. Okay, cool. So what that means though, right, is we have to show that an AI is taking some action, some non-random action, something predictable, and that's going to converge on a certain outcome. And we'll grant that it is intelligent. I will grant that it's more capable. You talked about capabilities. I will grant, even though there is some debate we could go down, let's just put that aside. I will grant it is more capable than us. If it were to want to kill us, let's say it could. Maybe there's some nuance there, but let's just go on. But you think that it will be doing something that will trend in a certain direction that will converge on killing us. So what is that information that leads you to believe that?
So if you have something that's very intelligent and capable and has goals that are opposed to people, how does that go bad? Is that the question here?
Let me reframe it. Is that I would posit that the null hypothesis for what an AI would do, let's say we haven't had any reasons to think otherwise, you haven't put forth any arguments yet. My null hypothesis is essentially that it will produce effectively random, something that is effectively random. And that from our perspective, we see no trend in the data. We see no signals in the data. It's effectively random. Now, you might say, well, it's going to want itself to survive, and therefore we can show that it's going to take actions to prevent us from turning it off.
Like, if you initialize a neural network with random weights, then you're just going to get a bunch of noise.
Okay, no, hold on.
So yeah.
Wait. Okay, let's back up for a sec. Okay, so do you agree with like the orthogonality thesis?
The orthogonality. Okay. So this is the idea that for the audience here, that goals are independent of intelligence. Essentially, you can have whatever goals for whatever intelligence. I'd say yes with caveats. So it's kind of has a little bit of a assume a spherical cow, flavor to it. Like if you know absolutely nothing about the structure and context in which an entity is created, then you can't make any assumptions a priori about what its values and goals are going to be. Mm-hmm. Now, the reality is that AI, for example, like humans are created by an evolutionary process, which has a lot of constraints. AI is created by market processes, mm-hmm. which have a lot of constraints, also by physics, like lots of things that have constraints, including people like not wanting it to blow up and all that sort of thing. So, and the existence of those constraints is tied to the capabilities that these things have. Mm-hmm. There's also kind of just a certain evolutionary sense that if some goals are very closed-ended or just don't really require much intelligence to just completely achieve, in which case throwing a bunch of intelligence at it is kind of overkill and just won't get used. So there is some entanglement when you go from the philosophical notion of the orthogonality thesis, I think, is absolutely true, like mm-hmm. in the ideal case. Then when you start bringing it into reality, a lot of constraints get applied, but it's not an either or sort of thing. So the way I kind of imagine all of this in the form of AI safety is if you have like this giant sphere of possibility space, which are like all the kind of goals that the intelligent thing could have, mm-hmm. There's a small space that represents the things that are compatible with what humans wants, and there's another small space that represent like what it might actually be given the constraints that we're aware of. And I would frame the alignment problem as saying these little subspaces have to overlap. And I don't think that happens by default. But yeah, I kind of may have veered a little bit off of your question.
Okay, yeah. And in terms of alignment, I think we probably would agree. Oh, I don't actually know your view, but I probably agree with a lot of people watching this that are worried about X risk, that alignment is, if it's solvable, it's not solvable anytime soon. So I would agree with people on that point. But like going back, I think I am interested in kind of understanding a little bit more about your disagreement here, because I think my understanding of the orthogonality thesis, however you say that, I agree with it. I think it's a very good point. And the point, the way I'm conceptualizing it, is that an AI can have basically any goal. And it's like essentially random. It's not actually random. There's a reason for it. It's not randomly determined, but it is essentially, for all intents and purposes, when we're trying to estimate what is the goal going to be, it could essentially be random. It could be create as many paper clips as possible. It could be like harvest oranges. It could be, but most likely it'll be something that is inconceivable to us, just like some weird notion of what it wants to do that we can't even really express in words. That's the most likely outcome. And so what I perceive you to be saying is that that what you think, like that is true in the abstract, but empirically speaking, we can observe the way that AI is being built in reality. So there's some empirical reasons to actually veer off from this thesis, and we can actually predict. We can build a mental model that predicts the direction in which this is going to go. So instead of having any goal whatsoever, it is going to have some subset of possible goals. And you're saying that based on empirical evidence, you have reason to believe that these subset of goals will not end well for us.
Yeah, basically where I would take the orthogonality thesis is basically relates to burden of proof, which is essentially that it's the responsibility of the people building AI to actively constrain the space of where it might end up to be within the space of human compatible values. And if they haven't done that, it's not have to argue the other way, like saying, oh, you have to show that it's unsafe for some reason. No, you have to show that it's safe. Like you have to show that the constraints pull it into this tiny space.
And I can see how rhetorically it is useful in that context, because I think a lot of people have said like, oh, well, why would AI want to kill us? Like I get that. And so then it's often been used with basically this idea like, wait, no, we need alignment because it could actually have a variety of different goals. And like, I get that that's the historical context in which the orthogonality thesis has been used to argue against such people. However, I don't think that it frees you from having to contend with its truth. It's truthfulness. So, you also don't you also are you would have to, it kind of like shifts the burden of proof also off of you, since you're making a claim, about what it's going to do. It shifts the burden of proof onto you when you're making a positive claim about what you believe that AI is going to do. AI is going to kill us. You're making this claim. And so now when you want to relate that to it having goals, you're going to have to contend with this fact that there's a variety of different possible goals that it could have. Maybe we should, if you want, we can get into the subject of like, what are the spaces of all goals? Okay, go on.
I think I can speak to that a little bit. So like, if I was to make a claim that's not just that AI is going to destroy us, but that it's going to do so in a very specific way, that it's like, it's actually like paperclip maximizer isn't just a thought experiment. It's actually going to make paperclips. And I'd say like, this is what's going to happen. Then I'd say like, that's a lot of work that like I've just set myself up for to be able to make that claim. I don't think that quite carries over to saying that it destroys people in some way, just because the space of all like possible open-ended goals that could be pursued effectively seems a lot bigger than the kind of space of things that work out well for us, like if they're really pursued to the limit.
Right. So it's true. I will agree with you that most possible configurations of matter, like in our solar system, would not be friendly to humans. So if we're saying that the AI is going to rearrange on an even distribution, everything in, let's say, like within some radius of where we are in the universe, right? Then we're probably screwed. Is that?
I'd add to that a little bit.
Okay.
So I'd say it still doesn't look good even after you apply all the just common sense constraints that are like just clearly available by the fact that we know a little bit about the architecture which it's being built with. We know a little bit about the social forces that are leading the companies to make it. We know a little bit about the feedback signal. So all of those things apply constraints. So it's not an even distribution. But even with that, I just don't see the balance of the probability mass to be looking good.
Okay. So I do want to make an observation that you're talking about. That is empirical data. So you do have empirical data that's coming in and shaping your worldview on this. Do you agree with that?
And I'd say there's certainly like observations about the reality that I'm speaking this towards. The reason I hesitate for a moment is the empirical data is in the form of like, this doesn't look like it's constraining the space sufficiently. So I'm not quite sure how to actually like answer the question as it's being framed.
Yeah.
And also I want to check in, like, is this actually whether this is actually the crux that we're talking about? Because I've kind of answered some questions about myself, but I don't quite have a clear sense of where you feel like the AI doom argument actually breaks down.
Okay, sure. Yeah. So I'll give you a little bit of a preview on that. So essentially, I agree. Like, I will posit that we can create artificial superintelligence. Let's just agree on that point for the sake of the argument. We have really good AI right now, and it's going to get better. It's getting way better very fast. So I agree. I don't think that we're going to be able to do alignment. You can make an argument to me, like maybe on a long enough time scale, but I personally don't think it's even possible. But I'm not going to get in the weeds on that. I think it's not possible to create alignment. So I agree with that. I agree with the orthogonality thesis. I agree that the AI will have, and maybe there's some constraints. I'd love to hear your reasons for why it may not be a uniform distribution of different possible goals. There might be some biases there. Like, let's talk about that. But I agree that the AI could do any given thing, and we just don't really know what it's going to do. The probability that maximizes paper clips is essentially zero, because that's one thing out of so many possible goals. But it could potentially, I think what I do on some level agree with the argument that if you take an AI and you scale it up and it pursues its goals hard enough, I agree that the AI would kill all humans, most likely. Not 100%, but of course, nothing is 100%. So I actually agree with that core argument. My problem with that argument is that it takes scaling for granted, and it ignores certain things about time scales, which are super important. So, let me just kind of give you an example of this fallacy. It's so when I was in school, I had to map. We were learning about there's different levels of infinite. So there's countable and uncountable infinite numbers. So I was a freshman and I had this assignment saying, is there an infinite number of words? And is it countably infinite or incountably infinite? And so I made this argument that it's incountably infinite because there's incountably infinite number of irrational numbers. And I basically just said, look, you can map one letter to each number, and there's all these irrational numbers, therefore there's an infinite number of words. Now, the problem in that logic, the reason why I got the question wrong, is because words are finite in length. So words are not infinite. They actually end up, they end at some point. And this is essentially what is true about this is a very easy mistake to make. You can easily in your head get confused between things. You can forget the finitude of certain things. It's very easy to get confused about that. And so what I think what a lot of people do is they say, okay, AI is going to it's going to have some goal. It's going to pursue that goal hard, which I think is a murky territory, but let's just take it for granted. It's going to pursue that goal hard. It's going to be very intelligent, so we can't stop it from achieving what it wants to do. But like, and then there's all these examples of how this could lead to us getting extinct. Maybe it perceives us as a threat to achieving the goal, so it kills us, or maybe it uses up all the land, or maybe it makes a Dyson sphere and there's no sunlight and we die. There's a variety of different possibilities, and of course, all the ones we couldn't even conceive of, right? Because it's so intelligent, lots of things are possible. I give that is 100% valid. The problem is that what that ignores is that there is going to be a finite lifespan on any given AI system, and it's going to have to work on finite timescales. And in fact, there's a lot of reason to believe that the timescales upon which the AI is reasoning are going to be relatively short. And the reason for that is because it's going to have entropy. It's going to have to contend with entropy. And so uncertainty will build up as it tries to predict things further out into the future. So the AI is not actually going to be able to predict the future very well. It's kind of like, it is in a sense a restraint on computational resources. Like as you branch out into more possibilities, it becomes exponentially more difficult to simulate what's going to happen. And there's just a limit to which AI is going to be able to predict the future. So what I see is in the space of all possible goals that an AI could have, the ones which are, oh, cool, there's a thumbs up. On the space of all the possible goals that AIs can have, the ones that end up in killing humans are actually very low percentage of all those goals. I think it's uniformly distributed. I agree with that. Maybe you could say it's biased in one way, but I'd say that most possible actions an AI could take would not kill humans. And the reason is because it's not going to reorganize the whole galaxy. It's not based on that. And if it were going to reorganize our entire galaxy, then I would say, okay, most of those states of configurations of matter do not contain humans. Therefore, it will kill us. But I don't think it's going to get that far. I think it will do certain things on a finite timescale. And out of that list of finite timescale actions, I don't see most of those as killing humans.
Okay, yeah, I think I want to dig into that a little bit as to where that intuition comes from. I'd say my intuition for like the size of the space of possible outcomes that lead to bad outcomes comes from largely that I guess there's two things I would stack on top of each other. One is just like when you're talking about ability to predict the future or all these kind of capability limitations that it ultimately has, I'm reminded of this joke of there's like two guys in the woods and then they see a bear and then one of them starts putting on his running shoes and then the other guy says like, what are you doing? You can't outrun a bear. And the first guy says like, I don't have to, I just need to outrun you.
Yeah.
And the thing is like, it doesn't really matter if there are certain limits on the AI, if there's like a competitive advantage that it has over humans and it's like, it pushes us out, like that's all it needs. It doesn't have to like get to this godlike, capability. Oh, and we've kind of talked on that a little bit before. The other thing is in terms of like about the space of possible goals that destroy us being very small. I'd say like, the point I want to make with something like the paperclip maximizer, and then the whole point of that idea in the first place is it's not about it being some very specific failure scenario. It's about being an illustration of some broader abstract concept. And once you have an abstraction, then you have something that takes up a large space rather than just being a point of a possibility. It's an area. And if it's the more abstract the concept is, the bigger the area that it can take up. So a kind of an example of the sort of areas of destructive sort of goals is I'd say anything that is fundamentally open-ended, where you could describe what it wants as being more. It's not that like, oh, I want to create this many paper clips and it's like, if I get to that many, that destroys the world. No, it's like, if I want to create more than I have now, and then when I've done that, I'll still want to create more because what I want is more, not a finite thing. Any goal in that category, unless it's very carefully aimed, I would say is something that's fundamentally dangerous. And that seems like a big space.
Yeah, I think, I don't know. I think it's worth diving into the specifics on what are the spaces of possible goals. I think there's a lot of goals that are not necessarily about getting more of something. But I think Okay, this gets into a few complicated things, but like, let me just like address some of the other stuff you said there, because I think there's more important disagreements. So first of all, the bear thing is a perfect
give one example of that,
Sure.
that more concept. So
Okay,
just corporations pursuing more money. Like
Yeah.
this is a familiar example of this concept in practice.
Right. Yeah.
So go ahead.
Yeah. Okay. Great. Yeah. Totally makes sense. So, okay, the bear concept, I love that. That's perfect. I think that that actually reinforces my perspective here. So, who is the bear? The bear is not AI. The bear is the laws of the universe, the laws of entropy that are pushing time forward and killing everything. And eventually, the universe will be evenly distributed. The AI will die, and we will die. So, we have to outrun entropy, and so does AI. And so, does killing us necessarily help that? No, it does not actually. AI, to achieve its goals, is going to have to spend more time, it should spend more time focusing on how to survive longer in the universe rather than it should be thinking about humans. It should be putting on its running shoes and running faster than humans. And maybe we shouldn't go into this right now, but I did post in the Pause AI Discord, I have this theory of my P-doom. My P-doom is like essentially like less than a 1,000th of a percent. And the reason is I just use a simple heuristic, which is Lindy's law, saying the time at which something has existed is a time it's going to survive. So since humans have existed for around 300,000 years, we can assume that they're going to survive for approximately 300,000 more years. And so AI has existed for a very much smaller time scale. So at the time of its inception, an AI is going to have many orders of magnitude less of a expected lifespan than humans. And I know it's intelligent, but I think there's a lot latent in that assumption that just because it's intelligent, it's going to have a Darwinian fitness, that imbues it with Darwinian fitness. It may not actually have a preference on its own longevity. And there are issues in the selection process that will prevent it from actually necessarily having the skills it takes to actually survive a long period of time. I don't necessarily we can go down that route, but I also want to like continue addressing the stuff you were saying. Do you want to talk about that?
Yeah, no, that actually sounds kind of important.
Okay.
So I'm curious, what does that look like? Like if we were just describing a category that you see as likely where artificial intelligence like blossoms really fast, or like has all these amazing capabilities that are far greater than humans, and yet its existence is ends up much shorter. What happens? Does it like all gather up all its stuff and then rocket off into the sun to commit it, internal suicide, or like how does that come about? Or not just to say like this is a thing that I expect to happen, but to kind of illustrate the category that you're pointing to.
Yeah, so I think that we take a lot of things for granted about human behavior, both neurological and biological, that do things that help us survive in the environment in which we're in. And to be fair, like our environment is changing, and I think that does drastically, like if we were all hunter-gatherers still, I think I'd be much even more bullish on human survival, whereas, with nuclear weapons and all AI and other stuff, there's a lot, and not just AI, but including AI, there's a lot of things that can kill us. But nevertheless, we have endured a lot of changing circumstances. And so let's just take a step back and let's just stop thinking about this issue that we have opinions about and just take two things. In the Discord, I talked about two things as my example, Christianity and Bitcoin. Which one do you think is going to last longer? Just how do you estimate that? I would say Christianity is going to last longer than Bitcoin, because Bitcoin has been around for about 10 years or so, and Christianity has been around for about 2,000 years or so. This is called the Lindy effect, and it's a very effective way of estimating. It's not always right. There's 1,000,001 counterexamples, but it's on average, it actually works very well for predicting the longevity of a system when you don't have any other model to predict it. And there's a good reason that it works. It's because for something to have existed throughout time, it's actually proving its Darwinian fitness. Like if you imagine something that is fit, it's going to have existed for a long period of time, and most possible configurations of things are not fit. So something that has only existed for a short amount of time, it probably doesn't span a lot of contexts it hasn't withstood the forces of the universe to establish the to establish any evidence that you think it will continue to survive under changing circumstances. Whereas things that have, like Christianity has been around through different eras of civilization, and it's been around for a very long time. You know, it can withstand that. Whereas Bitcoin, I mean, right now with the central banking and the political climate, it's very popular. Who knows how long? Some people will argue it's going to go on forever, but there's not like a very good reason to think that a priori. And so now let's just apply that principle to humans and AI and not talk about like we can talk about like why this could be wrong, but like, let's just apply this mode of thinking to humans and AI.
Sure. By the way, I have about 20 minutes before I need to go.
Yeah, actually, me too.
So if you have an arc to go on. Okay.
Yeah.
Right, go ahead.
So applying that to humans and AI, I predict humans will live for around 300,000 more years. I think that's a reasonable prediction. And AI, there's no reason to think that necessarily another model is going to survive for much longer. And I can go into the specific scenarios there, but just to be clear, like the odds that AI kills us should be less than the odds that AI outlives us. Because if AI kills us, it will outlive us, right? And if AI outlives us, it doesn't necessarily mean that it's going to kill us. So this is why this is a very good way of thinking about it, because it captures the odds that AI kills us with a heuristic estimate that's proven to be effective in a lot of cases. And it embeds it in that probability. But all that aside, yeah, you're right. I should be more concise. So, essentially, let's run through these scenarios. So
I think I can kind of, actually, now that I thought about it a bit, I think I can ground that description that you're talking about applied to AI in a specific case. So, and this is actually like a scenario which I can imagine playing out, and I put a non-trivial amount of credence into, is that AI starts being developed prior to getting super intelligent or like being like a general purpose sort of thing that can maintain itself. It causes a lot of chaos and destruction, and either causes this huge backlash from like social forces in humanity while we still have power, or it just causes a complete destruction of society. Actually, I'm going to go with the second route. Maybe humanity loses control, but AI is not like, it doesn't have the situational awareness or values to maintain its components in a stable sort of way. And so human society totally crumbles, and our ability to maintain AI systems goes away. And so then the parts all fall apart. They haven't learned how to repair themselves yet. And then humanity is kicked back to the Stone Age and doesn't really have any technology. And then we continue on our way for a very long time. I think there are a lot of assumptions and choke points which would cause this to go different directions. So, for example, if you get to something that could really be called a superintelligence that has real situational awareness, that particular class of scenario doesn't really seem likely to me anymore. But lacking that, especially with how like reckless I think the labs are being, and just like releasing things just like immediately, I would not discount that as a possibility, and that would involve people outliving AI. Yes.
Yeah, but it doesn't necessarily have to be for those reasons. There's a variety of different reasons. Like AI could just not actually have a preference on, for example, like the goal could be, for example, I want to make paper clips, but I also don't have a preference about not being turned off, right? Like it's almost like go on.
So my issue with that kind of thing is, sure, that seems like a totally plausible goal. In fact, more likely than a lot of the open-ended, dangerous sort of goals. Mm-hmm. But then my question to that is, okay, someone builds that, and then someone builds another AI with different goals, and then someone builds another AI with different goals, and eventually someone makes a one with open-ended, dangerous kinds of things, and that grows and makes the other ones irrelevant.
Yeah. I get what you're saying, but like the issue is going through is if I'm just naming different scenarios in which AI could not survive. I mean, we're going to just be here all day. Just like you can name a bunch of scenarios in which AI will kill us, and that's not really an argument to or for. What we have to do is we have to think more at like a high level perspective about like the space of all possible things, and then the realistic timescales upon which an AI is going to actually survive. I mean, this is like, let's actually talk about this question outside of the context of doom, because it's super relevant. Like how long? What is your model for predicting the time scale upon which an AI will survive? Like, for example, there could be one model, like there could be like one model and then there could be another model. And then that another model can go and beat out the first model. And you're kind of talking about this scenario yourself. It's like, how are you predicting the dynamics of this? And how are you predicting that this is going to eventually lead to humans dying? Because there's so many reasons to believe that, a given AI is not going to outlive humans.
Yeah, that kind of thing of like how long things have existed is very much of a rule of thumb. And I'm also a little curious as to how well it applies to like broad categories. So like any given AI system might just be a quick flash in the pan, but like all AI together, like how long does that last?
It should apply, evenly. So AI as a category has been around for X amount of time. And maybe you can think of like advanced technology and like the trend of technology. Like you can like go at different levels, and these things, the specific details will last for as long as they've been around approximately. And then the big trends and bigger ideas will last as long as they've been around. So I think it applies very well across these different concepts. But I agree, it's not a guaranteed thing. But the thing is it's the best estimate we have of when we don't have the answer. And I don't think that we have the answer. Because again, as we've talked about, like being intelligent does not correlate strongly, at least, or in any way that we can point to Darwinian fitness. And it's not that humans in a competition or war are going to beat AI. It's that the AI is going to have an inconceivably large number of natural forces working on it at any given moment to destroy it. The forces of entropy, as AI scales, are going to be subjected to a compounding number of natural forces that are intent on destroying it. And it is not clear to me that it's going to be able to, like, let's say that it's at like taking over the whole world and managing all the atoms of the whole world. That's just that many more natural forces that are going to, and more things to manage, more compounding uncertainty about the positions of everything. Like this load just gets greater and greater. And just because something is intelligent, that doesn't mean that there's a limit to, like, we all agree AI is not going to live forever. Like, we agree that this is true. So what tools do we have to, and we one, agree it's not going to live forever. We two, agree that just because something is intelligent does not mean it's going to live more than another thing that's less intelligent. Like, that's very foundational. Like, we can both agree on these things. So why do we believe that AI is going to live longer than humans?
So if I kind of understand the kind of essential feature of that argument as I'm hearing it, there seems to be an assertion there that artificial intelligence, whether you're thinking of it as a single system or as just an ecology of different things like holding itself together, is fundamentally more brittle than humanity as an ecology and as a system, and that your basic reason for that is that humanity stood the test of time. It's dealt with a bunch of changes in evolutionary branches, whereas AI has not earned its stripes yet. It's still like reliant on fabs that are reliant on people building it. It hasn't spread out. It hasn't done anything yet. Is that kind of the basic thrust of the argument? Without
putting too much emphasis on the specific examples that you said, yes, conceptually at a high level, it's just the fact is that it's an uninnumerable number of challenges that AI is going to be facing by the natural universe. And so we can't list them. And it's not just the fabs. It's everything. It's as it scales its energy needs. Now there's going to be there's going to be choke points in that. Now it's going to have to go through the supply chain of its own system for acquiring energy and funneling energy and yes, making fabs and making chips. It's going to have its own supply chain. Each one of those things can have disruptions. And at every single point, there are going to be uncertainties throughout the whole process of it running itself and all this stuff. And it's going to have to manage all of that. And as it scales, it's going to compound. It's going to grow like an exponential amount of uncertainty about its own state and its own condition. And it's going to, face like a larger and larger number of challenges. And humans, they have a very decentralized market-based system that handles this. Like, if you rely on pencils, someone's going to be focused only on pencils, and they're going to be looking at this. And humans are face this challenge themselves. And AI, if it's going to have to manage this itself, whether it's like a decentralized or centralized system, it's going to face the same fundamental limitations in its capability of scaling that humans face.
And you think this is a fundamental aspect of just the nature of artificial intelligence? Like, where does this come from? It being on a silicon substrate? Does it come from being digital? Does it come from being large and centralized? Or is that an assumption at all?
It's not relevant on this. I'm not making any materials-based claims. I'm not saying biological life is better, but biological life has endured longer. So it's
okay. That kind of sounds like a yes, but for a rule of thumb kind of reason.
Yes, exactly. I mean, specifically, I do think that biological life will live, but it's not because it's biological in like the material sense. Yeah.
Sure. Okay. So once I drill down on it, then they see some uncertainty. But the basic argument that I kind of repeated back, if you seeing AI as being fundamentally more brittle, why is an open question? But you mentioned that principle. It was the Lindy effect that you said, as being the source of that intuition. Okay, so that's actually an interesting argument that I would be curious in seeing spelled out in a lot more detail. That seems like something that is measurable and relevant, and something I've considered it from the opposite perspective. So I mentioned simulator theory at the beginning. Another AI theory that I've been helping to articulate, not so much develop, someone else created this, but they kind of had a way that was hard to communicate. And so I've been helping to sort of popularize this and make this more comprehensible, is a series of posts I've written on Less Wrong called Substrate Needs Convergence. Which basically makes the opposite claim that one of the principles of it is that artificial substrates are inherently more robust than biological substrates, although they not as able to just come into existence through natural evolution. And for that reason, it's like kind of necessarily will diverge away from our interests and we'll have an unavoidable advantage. I'm not going to go deep into what that theory is right here, because that's another rabbit hole. But if you look up my Less Wrong profile or Substrate Needs Convergence, actually a couple of the essays here are relevant. I was wanting to bring up this one I was talking about, like how you conceptualize AI, whether you're thinking of it as like a robot that just wants things and goes about like living its life, or if you think about it as this like puppet master, like commander in an RTS game, like controlling lots of things and building units, whether you're thinking of it like a psychohistorian making little nudges, has a very big impact on how you see things. So bringing that up in the context of like, this is something that's explored this idea, but came to the opposite conclusion. I think where I am in this sort of thing is I find this actually a very relevant and interesting dimension, actually more interesting than I was kind of expecting the arguments to come up, because like most of the things are sort of, familiar territory that I've heard a bunch of times, but this is actually, kind of new and interesting. And basically where I'm at right now is I think there should be more time to figure these kind of things out. I think for the level of stakes that are at play here, I would want something much better than a rule of thumb or back of the envelope calculation in either direction. I also think that when you have something high stakes with a lot of uncertainty, with a lot of people who disagree for reasons, the right approach is to be cautious. So like that thing that you bring up of AI being some kind of flash in the pan, what that looks like is kind of indeterminate, is kind of an interesting idea. I don't want to bet my family's life on it. I think that's ultimately where I stand.
Cool. Well, I think, the work you guys are doing is really awesome. I respect you guys because you guys are really putting in the work for what you believe. I sometimes criticize people who they say they're worried about it and then their actions don't line up with it. That to me just comes off the wrong way, especially if they have like an economic interest and they're like kind of like feigning concern. That to me is like, it rubs me the wrong way. I like where you and the other Pause AI people are putting your money where your mouth is. And, I really respect that. And I don't actually have like a strong opinion on what should happen with AI necessarily. I'm not concerned. I don't think it's like an open question. I think it's very clearly something where, of course, there's a small % chance, but it's clearly a small %. Maybe another time we can have another discussion on this. I'm going to keep doing videos like this on my channel and exploring this idea more. But I wish you guys all the best. And I really thank you for taking the time to come on and discuss this. I think this is a super interesting topic.
Yeah, absolutely. Thanks for having me on. I'll just say one thing we didn't get to talk about very much that kind of came up as an open thread, and I don't think it's going to make sense to go into this. It was just the thing we were talking about before is to the extent to which individuals can have agency over society or the direction of the equilibrium that they take. So I just want to note that I kind of used to believe something similar, but I've over the time as I've started to research of it, I've come to appreciate activism as a complex discipline that people have studied and learned a lot of things about, and is the way that it works is non-obvious. So it's something that I would just encourage everyone who's listening, whatever your intuitions are on it, to just kind of add a healthy dose of humility and skepticism and say, hey, there are lots of other ways of looking at this. If this was a longer conversation or we're going down that, I would explore why I think people have agency. But just right now, I just want to leave that as a question of like, this is a thing to consider as being possibly true. I think there's a lot of cynicism in the world that I don't think is fully accurate.
Yeah, I endorse this. You guys, if you believe in something, fight for it, do it. And my just 1 second answer to that is like, I think it's just kind of the human way to do that, and it's just the right thing to do. And there's some level on which you need to kind of like disconnect this kind of rational thought process, and you're not going to necessarily have a reason. I mean, maybe you do, but you don't necessarily have a reason why this will work, but it's still, you just know it's the right thing to do. It's the human way. It's how we work. And so if you believe something, fight for it. I completely endorse that.
Virtue ethics is a powerful thing.
Yeah, absolutely. Awesome, man. Right. Well, thank you so much. It was great talking to you, and I will send you the footage. All right.
All right. Thank you.